Hello everyone, welcome back. What we are going to learn in this video is how to set up dynamic Jenkins build agents using Docker. So let's try to understand why we have to go for dynamic Jenkins build agents or slaves. So if you look at my website, I do have instructions here on how to set up Jenkins slave. If you try to understand the architecture here, all the slaves, whatever is described in this diagram, is they're all static in nature, right? So you're creating a slave machine, which is essentially nothing but a virtual machine. You're setting up slave in it by installing Java and Maven, and then you're integrating with Jenkins master. But you're keeping them, all of them running, isn't it? So whether there is a build or not, still they're all going to be running. So you're not actually making use of them more efficiently, right? So we are going to solve this problem by introducing dynamic slaves. So only if there is a demand, if somebody is checking in the code, if Jenkins is running the build, so what Jenkins is going to do, it is going to provision uh, Jenkins slaves on demand. It is going to run the job, and then after the job is done, it is going to disappear, right? So that is what I mean by dynamic slaves. Okay, so how to implement that? So if you look at this diagram, so basically the way we are going to implement this is, yes, we need to have Jenkins master, okay, and then we are going to set up a Docker host machine, preferably another VM, and then we are going to open up port number 4243. This is where we are going to expose Docker API so that Jenkins master can access Docker host using this port number. And then we are also going to open up these port ranges. So this is not like particular port number. So this is like a range, which we are going to mention in the Docker host firewall rule. So we have to open up these port ranges as well as this port number. So whenever Docker host is going to provision those Jenkins slaves, which are all nothing but Docker containers, they're all going to use one of these port numbers, right? So that is how we are going to open up these port numbers. Okay. All right. So let's quickly go over the agenda. Let's try to understand how we are going to implement the setup. So this is a prerequisites. Yes, like I said, we need to have Jenkins setup. Jenkins needs to have port 8080 open in the firewall rule, and then we also need to have a Docker host setup, and we have to open up these port numbers. And this is a specific port number 40 to 43, and this is the port number range. And then the way we are going to implement this is we are going to expose Docker host. We are going to expose remote API in the Docker host. Okay, and then we are going to build a Jenkins slave Docker image, because Docker host is using that Docker image is going to spin up Docker containers, which are all nothing but Jenkins slaves. And then we are going to configure Jenkins server to integrate with Docker host. And then we are going to configure Docker cloud agent templates. Using that, it is going to spin up Docker containers. And then finally, we are going to test our demo, right? Whether this is actually working or not. So either you can create a freestyle job or you can create a pipeline job, and then you can mention the Jenkins Docker slave, and then you can run the job just to make sure that Jenkins was able to provision dynamic slave Docker container. Okay, so that is what we are actually going to cover in this video. Awesome. So let's get started. So this is my website, coachdevops.com. I will be posting the link right below the video as well. Okay, great. So if you see here, we need to have Jenkins master up and running. I already have Jenkins master up and running here. This is my Jenkins master. And what we have to do, we also need to provision another EC2 instance where we are going to configure Docker. So that machine is going to act as a Docker host. So let me quickly go ahead and then launch an instance. And I'm going to name that as Docker host. I'm going to choose Ubuntu. Obviously, you can use any Linux operating system, but I'm going to go ahead with Ubuntu 18.04. Let me provision with t.medium. I'm going to use my existing key. And then this is where it gets a bit tricky, right? So we have to open up those port numbers. So we have to open a specific port number 4243, and let's add a new firewall rule here, add security rule 4243, and then let's mention the CIDR block. So basically you are going to mention the source IP address would be, that is nothing but that is your Jenkins master IP, right? But I'm going to leave it open, so that's fine. But you know, in a typical corporate work environment, you know, you're going to provide your Jenkins master IP address, right, or DNS name. Okay. All right. Let me also add another port number. I mean the port number range. So we have to add these port number ranges. So I'm going to copy that. So when you paste it, make sure you don't give any space. Okay, that is how you're going to mention the port number range. And then yeah, again, so you're going to mention your Jenkins master IP address over here, or DNS name. Okay, I think that is good. And let me increase the root volume to 15 gig. I think that's about it. Let me quickly go ahead and then launch it. So basically we are configuring a Docker host instance. Host is up and running. Let's quickly connect to it. So we need to set up Docker in it. Okay, perfect. So let me go ahead and then perform update. So apt update. So we are going to update to the latest packages and everything. And of course, you can also click on this particular link. This will take you to how to set up Docker. It's pretty straightforward. All you have to do is just install these commands, right? That's it. Perfect. So once Docker is installed, now what we are going to do, we are going to configure our Docker host to enable remote API, right? So let's execute this command. So basically, we are going to open up this Docker service file. That is the path, and look for this particular line, exe start. Okay. So what we are going to do, we are going to comment that line. Okay. And then I'm going to copy and paste this line. So what does this mean? So we are going to expose a Docker API on port number 4243, right? And then I'm just mentioning, you know, like any machine can access. So that is what that means, right? Okay. And then once you do that, save that and then come out of it. Since we made that configuration change, in order to those changes to take effect, we have to reload the system daemon file, and then we have to restart the Docker service. This will take a few seconds. Okay, and then why don't we quickly make sure everything is working fine? I'm going to say Docker status. Okay, perfect. So it says that everything is good. Okay, let's come out of it. So I think that's pretty much it over there on the Docker host machine. Oh, one more thing. We need to verify that, you know, we are able to access Docker host on port number 4243. So what we can do is, let's perform this curl command 4243/version. So when you do that, this should be able to, you know, give us some response, right? So it means that we are able to access you know, Docker host on this port number, right? So we are able to make a API call. Perfect. So everything is good. Okay. So we are going to use this Docker host DNS name with this port number in the Jenkins when we are going to register that. Okay. We will do that in step number 3. Okay. So now let's move on to step number 2. We completed step number 1, which is nothing but configuring a Docker host with a remote API. So that is done. Now we are going to go ahead and build the Jenkins slave Docker image. Okay. So what I have done is, I have already created a GitHub repository, right? I have already created a repository with the Docker file here. So we are going to use this Docker file to build the Jenkins slave Docker image. Okay, so if you look at inside, of course, I'm using Ubuntu 18.04. I'm also installing Git, installing the open SSH server, installing default JDK, Maven, whatever is needed typically to run the build and whatnot. And then I'm also configuring SSH username and password. So this is the SSH username and then password. So we are going to use this because we are using Jenkins Docker slave, which is kind of a SSH based. You can also use, there is another protocol as well, I think JP NLP, but we are going to cover only, this particular, Jenkins slave type. Okay. All right. So let's move on. So what we are going to do, we are going to download that particular code here, right? And one more thing, I also have added .ssh folder with authorized keys file. So that is also needed because we are going to copy this file to the container. Okay. So let's go ahead and then clone this. So if you see here, I'm still in the Docker host machine because Docker host needs a Docker image because using this image, it is going to provision bunch of slave Docker containers on demand, right? Okay, so perfect. So we're able to clone. Now let's go ahead and then build the Docker image. So I'm going to say my Jenkins slave. Okay, so I want to build a Jenkins slave Docker image. Perfect. So as you can see here, this was able to successfully build the Docker image, and we should be able to see the Docker image right now. Perfect. There you go. You see here. So we were successfully able to build the Docker image. Perfect. We are able to see the Docker image. Now let's move on to step number 3. We are going to log into Jenkins server, and then we are going to install Docker plugin, and then we are going to configure Docker agent templates, which is going to provision containers on demand. Okay, awesome. So let's go into Jenkins master. So this is my Jenkins master. Go to manage Jenkins, go to manage plugins, under available tab, search for Docker, and we are going to install this particular plugin, install without restart. Okay, so plugin got installed, and let's go to manage Jenkins, manage nodes and clouds. We are going to configure clouds and add new cloud, and we are going to choose Docker. Okay, and then click on Docker cloud details. So this is where we are going to provide a Docker host information. So as you know, so this is a Docker host DNS name, not Jenkins one, but Docker host one. So copy the public DNS name, because if you remember, if I type this command curl and then 4243 say version, we should be able to see the API response, right? So we are just going to mention that over here, but we are going to use TCP protocol. So let's say TCP. Oops. Docker host DNS name and then 4243. Perfect. Okay, and you don't have to add any credentials. Okay, and then let's click on enabled, and then we are going to click on test connection. So this should confirm that what is the Docker version we have installed and then what is the API version we have installed. So this means that we are able to access Docker host from Jenkins master. So far so good. So now we have to configure the Docker agent templates. So let's move on. Let's click on this one and then click on add Docker templates. So this is where we are going to register or provide Docker image information, the label information and everything. Okay. So now let's start here. Let me also look at the instruction that, what I have provided. So again, you can mention any label name, but I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to say Docker slave. Okay, say Docker slave, And then you might want to check this one, enable. So this has to be enabled. If you don't do that, then this will not be able to provision Docker containers on demand. And then the name, let's be consistent. Let's provide the same name as the label. And then the Docker image. So this Docker image is actually nothing but, if you guys remember, we built the Docker image, right? So we are going to provide this Docker image name. Okay, and you don't have to say colon latest. By default, that means that it is going to pull the latest Docker image only. Okay, and then remote file system root, that is going to be /home/Jenkins. Okay, and then the usage, yes, we want to use this node as much as possible. That's fine. And then the connect method, since I mentioned that we are going to use SSH protocol to connect from Jenkins master into slave using SSH. So we are going to go with this, or you can also connect using JNLP protocol as well. But the scope of this video is using SSH only. Okay, so let's click on connect with SSH, and then we have to add credentials. So let's see. So say use configured SSH credential. So if you guys remember, we have added in our Docker file. So this was the username, Jenkins is the username, and password is the password. Okay, and if you want to change the username and password, you can do it before you build the Docker image, and then once you change it, you can build the Docker image, and then you have to use that particular credentials. So let me add credentials. So the username is Jenkins, password is password, and here I'm going to say Jenkins agent SSH keys or SSH creds. Add, and then I'm going to select that from the drop down. Perfect. And then under host key verification strategy, we are going to go ahead with the non-verifying verification strategy. So that's it. And then the pull strategy. So if you see here, we have already, we have the Docker image here in the Docker slave. So this doesn't have to download or pull from anywhere. So you can select this option, which is nothing but never pull. Okay, perfect. I think that's pretty much over there. Let's quickly recap. So we have already registered the Docker host URI here, right? So you're able to get the response. And then the next step would be to configure Docker agent templates. So using this, it is going to, provision those Docker containers, Jenkins slave Docker containers. So this was the image, and this is the label. So this is the remote file system root. And then we are going to connect from master into slave containers using SSH keys or SSH protocol. And then yes, so these are the credentials. Perfect. And then yes, the pull strategy is never pull. Perfect. I think we are good. Let's click on apply and save. I'm not going to save this. So now the next step would be to go ahead and then create a job. So let me quickly create a freestyle job. Okay. So I want to give some freestyle job here. And let me also, okay, so we need to select this option. Okay. Because we want to run this particular job on a slave, right? So all we have to do is, what is the slave information we have provided. So if you remember, this was the label we have provided. Okay, so Docker slave. Perfect. And then I want to check out the code from some repository, right? So let me give some GitHub repository. I just want to make sure that I was able to do checkout and do a build. So this is the public repository. This doesn't need any credentials. The branch name is going to be main. So if you see here, I want to check out from main branch. Perfect. And let me see if I can also do Maven build as well. So add build step, invoke top level Maven target. Let's add a Maven goal here. So clean install, and my pom.xml file is inside that repository. I mean, inside this folder. Perfect. Apply, save. So let's go ahead and then click on build now. There you go. Let's see. This will take initially few seconds. Wow. Wow. Look at that, guys. Right now, as you can see that, the job is running on a on demand or dynamic slave. So this is the slave label. Okay. And then as you can see here, we were able to check out, we were also able to do a build, right? So here we were successfully able to do a build, right? Okay, so let me also go ahead and then create a pipeline job as well. Let me say my first pipeline, say okay, go to pipeline. Let me just create a hello world pipeline. And then over here, we need to specify the agent name. So I'm going to say label, and then I'm going to mention, so that is the label, Docker slave. Apply, save. Let's go ahead and then click on build now. So this is the pipeline job. Wow. See here? So pipeline was able to provision this Docker container. I mean, the Jenkins was able to provision this Docker container, and then it was able to execute this job on that particular slave machine, right? So yeah, so this is how, guys, this is how you can configure your Jenkins slaves dynamically using Docker containers. Thank you for watching this video, guys.